America's hottest new game show, The Blame Game. Richard Sherman going to join the show and a Browns bounce back. We've got all that and more. I'm Jason Fitz. It is time for Zero Blitz. All right, so this is like one of those 80s, 90s sitcom things because this is what I like to call a crossover episode. Gonna have a little bit of fun on Zero Blitz because we're bringing Fantasy Football Live into Zero Blitz. Andy Behrens joining me. Like, Andy, were you a big fan of like the, back when suddenly you'd have the cast of Cheers and Family Ties on the same show? Nobody really knew why they were supposed to be in the same city. Like, there was just a reason that suddenly the sitcom worked that way.
Oh, man. Huge fan. Yeah. Also a huge fan of like the game show crossover. Like when I get the cast of two different shows on Family Feud, that was incredible. I feel like you should have one of those like old school 70s, 80s, like little stick mics for this, but whatever. It's fine. We can make do.
I bought one a few years ago. I've got one of those like long, I've always wanted to be a game show host. Who hasn't? But I also think that there's some value. Like I want Fantasy Football Live to get so popular someday that we can be on Celebrity Family Feud. And then when Harmon gives an answer, instead of being like, good answer, we could just look over and say, what in the hell were you thinking? Right? Like, that's a level of honesty America needs there, where we can just look over and be like, Harmon, that is a terrible answer. And by the way, he is a delightful co-host to us on Fantasy Football Live. So I only trash talk him because he makes it clear he doesn't listen to anything outside his show. So I feel like this is carte blanche for us.
Oh yeah, man. America needs to experience the incredible indifference that Matt Harmon can show for anything other than a football conversation. I long for it.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have a little bit of fun. We're gonna take the fantasy football concepts and we're gonna walk it on this tightrope with the actual games that are happening in real life, a bit of both. So we're gonna go through this, but we're gonna play a little game that I like to call the Blame Game. I wish I had that big like 60s voice with like a little bit of music behind it. We've got the crowd walking in. I'm wearing bell bottoms, but the Blame Game, we're going to look at some, I don't know why bell bottoms. We're going to look at some underperforming players this year, try to determine whose fault it is. Cause it's not just bad enough that somebody sucks. We want to make sure that we know who to blame for the suckage we're watching. Are you on board for all of this?
I love it. Yeah, this is basically what the regular season consists of in fantasy. So this is wheelhouse stuff for me.
Can we? I know. Like before we get into the actual Blame Game itself. Sorry, this cord is moving on me. If you're watching it, I keep fidgeting. All right. Can we? Let me ask you this: as a fantasy football aficionado, because as you know, I've been like a toe dabbler, but this is the first time I've been consistently on a fantasy football show every week. I find that fantasy football owners in general, players in general, are like maybe the least happy people in the world. Like they're always like, I don't remember the last time I got a tweet from somebody that was like, holy cow, great suggestion on HN. He really exceeded my expectations. Nobody does that. But if I turn around and I say, hey, you should take a look at Michael Mayer this week, I get, you're a bum, you suck. Like fantasy football fans are not happy people.
Yeah, very high expectations. In fact, we're gonna talk about a couple players who, like, you can come up inches shy of a touchdown. Your team can be doing everything right and can be like a potential Super Bowl favorite. And man, if you're not giving me 20 points a week, what's wrong? This is terrible coaching. This is gross negligence. Yeah, you get very focused on individual performance within like the ultimate team game, right? It sets up some nasty conversations. Also, as soon as anybody has the experience of like one of those seasons from a player, like think about Cooper Kupp a couple years ago, right? Where he was just always a wide receiver one, week in, week out, never took an off week. Once you have that experience one time, you start demanding it from every player that you take in the top like 5 or 6 rounds, right? It's just not realistic. And when you start holding people to that standard, everybody's a disappointment all the time.
So I'm going to tell you the weirdest story in history. Then we'll start the Blame Game. Everybody calm the hell down. So I'm in Hendersonville, Tennessee years ago. which is right outside of Nashville, just north of Nashville. It's at this little bar. At the time, this was before, Jeff Jarrett went through some rehab stuff. He was sitting in the bar next to me. So I'm sitting there weirdly watching football. I happen to be one seat away from Jeff Jarrett. I'm watching my beloved Raiders take on the Steelers in a game that, frankly, wasn't going the Raiders' way. And all of a sudden, shocking. All of a sudden, there's this long, 80-yard touchdown run. And I am jumping up and down. I am mother effing in the bar. I am throwing things. I'm so excited, not just because the Raiders get the 80-yard touchdown, but this was peak Darren McFadden time, and I had Darren McFadden on my fantasy team in a very close game. So I knew that I was in a close matchup, and I knew this 80-yard touchdown would put me over the top, only to have Double J look over and tell me right after I'm celebrating and I'm telling the whole bar to suck it. He then tells me that wasn't McFadden. Like the Raiders had put in the backup running back for that one play who ran the 80 yards. I kid you not. For the rest of my life since that moment, I hesitate to ever put a Raider on my team. Like that is just rule number one for me is like, I'm going to be mad enough at the Raiders. I don't want to be mad at the Raiders if things are going well, but it's not the right player. So like it takes a true act of God for me to draft a Raider anywhere on my fantasy football lineup.
And in fact, that has not been a bad strategy this year or in most seasons in recent history.
That is a level of shade that gets us right to the playing game. All right, so we're going to look at some underperforming players this year. We're going to figure out whose fault it is. Let's start with one that I actually have on my fantasy roster. And every week when I look at it, I say, what in the hell is going on here? Dameon Pierce is somebody that we have pretty high expectations for this year coming in, and they have not been met. Who is to blame?
I'll give you first the sort of real life football explanation, and then I want to talk a little bit about like where the fantasy community set expectations for this guy, probably recklessly high. First of all, Pierce opened the season running behind an offensive line that was pretty mangled. Opening weeks, like throughout September, they're missing multiple starters, Laremy Tunsil included. So he's got some headwinds there. And then you throw in the fact that like at the time, you know, rookie quarterback for Houston, who had just been underrated by the entire league in the draft process, right? Pierce was facing a ton of 8 and 9 man fronts. And this shows up in next gen stats. Like the first month of the season, you'd look at it, Pierce was always at or near the top of the leaderboard in terms of the number of like 8+ in the box defensive fronts he was seeing. It was 45, 50, 55% each week. And it's rare for a running back to be able to overcome that consistently. Like we see it from, you know, Carolina era Christian McCaffrey, and we've seen it from Derrick Henry over the years, but it's not something that we expect from just any running back. So very difficult situation for him to open the year. And then just as like the line got healthy and Stroud really started to absolutely hum, Pierce got unhealthy, right? Like has the ankle injury and he's dinged right now. He's missed the last couple games. Only last week did we see Devin Singletary really do anything in his absence. So I think that's just sort of part of it. The season started with him in a really unfavorable position. The other thing I want to mention here, though, is where, and I got to blame the fantasy community itself for this, like the fantasy expert community. We did some bad extrapolating from the way that Dameon Pierce was being used in the preseason. Like, you know, and it's so dangerous to take like a really small slice of action from the preseason and say, aha, that must be the way the entire year is going to play out. But we did that. We were like, okay, Dameon Pierce is rarely coming off the field while CJ Stroud is on it. Therefore, that must mean he's just going to play 95, 100% of the snaps. And it was never going to work out that way. That's not the way it goes for any running back. Like, that's not why they signed Devin Singletary. It was just never going to happen. But people talked themselves into a place with Dameon Pierce that just, it was just never going to go down that way.
Yeah, no, all of that makes sense. And by the way, it's one of the things maybe next year I'll do a smarter job of in the draft process, asking myself, what's the quarterback situation look like around the running back? Because so often we look at the running back in a vacuum. But this year particularly, what we've seen is defenses have adjusted. And defenses across the board are simply so far ahead of offenses in this year's NFL. Like, it's just, that's real. And your point on stacking the box makes a ton of sense. Like, you're going to do that until CJ Stroud proves that you can't do that, which has now happened, which then, you know, by the time that's happened, everybody's already given up on what they have. So that is a smart. So moving forward, Dameon Pierce, like I know the health is part of the issue, but if we were going to take the blame game and try and find a rosy sunshine happy ending, I feel like there's more light at the end of the tunnel. That's a train coming at you here than there is a light of hope at the end of the tunnel for Dameon Pierce.
I will say it's all of a sudden a pretty high ceiling offense, right? Like Stroud has put himself in the MVP conversation, deservedly so. So we like that. You have to like the fact that there's no cost to Dameon Pierce right now, right? Like you can trade for him for almost nothing. He's available on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues. Like he hasn't played the last couple of weeks. People have dropped him. There is some concern that like Devin Singletary is going to take that job over, but I think the plan all along was that those two were going to be a committee and it's going to be 60-40, something like that. So I don't hate the idea of scooping up Dameon Pierce if you can get him for free. Because he, like everything that he did last year, that all really happened and that all still counts, right? Like he was an absolute revelation last year, and he still finished even though he missed like the back quarter of the season, he still finished like 4th or 5th among all running backs in missed tackles. Like he was really good. He can be good again. He's just got to get healthy.
All right, let's move to the next player on the blame game, and that would be one Tony Pollard. And, like, look, this is in part because Tony Pollard hasn't been as good as expected, and in part because whenever we can mention the Cowboys, that's a good thing. So what do we got here? Who is to blame? Let me just say this, like, we'll go full on first take. This has obviously got to be McCarthy and Dak's fault, right? Like, everything is McCarthy and Dak's fault with a little bit of blame going to Jerry Jones, and there we go. I've answered the question. But you, good sir, with your expertise, who would you put the blame on?
You can, in a sense, blame CeeDee Lamb if you want, because the Cowboys have all of a sudden built the entire offense around their actual best player, right? They've really centered CeeDee Lamb. This is a team that passes now when they get like in goal to go situations. Wasn't always that way this season, and I actually think Pollard has been like sneaky okay. He's just been a huge fantasy disappointment. And there's
listen to what you like. You're not wrong, but just the concept of like, hey, guys, he's been sneaky okay. Like that's just not where anyone thought it would be.
I totally get that no fantasy manager wants to hear it, right? There's a couple things going on here, and I think the most obvious is probably shouldn't forget that like he was less than 8 months removed from what seemed like it might be a catastrophic leg injury when it occurred in January, right? Like that when he started the season. So he was about 8 months removed from that. Broken leg, high ankle sprain, really nasty. So perhaps we can be understanding of this guy losing some explosiveness. The other thing is they have not, and I don't even know that this is bad, but they have not called as many outside runs for Tony Pollard as they did last year. And this is just simple facts in the numbers. Go to PFF, look it up. It's a lot of gap runs. It's a lot of like between the tackles running this year. It's about 60-40. Last year it was about 40-60, right? They would get him outside the tackles and he was breaking long gains like he has done in every season of his career. That hasn't necessarily been there. Like it used to be that we sort of defined Tony Pollard by the big play. There were always breakaways. Hasn't been there as much, but he's now arrived at this point. And there's a particular sequence from the Giants game that I want to bring up where like, even when everything he does is right, fantasy managers are really down on him. So they get in a situation. I think this is the second quarter. It is 1st and 10 from the Giants 19, and Tony Pollard delivers one of the best runs he's had all year. It's a 15-yard gain. It's up the middle. He probably gains like 6 yards after contact. He's spinning away from defenders. It's awesome. He gets them down to the 4-yard line. He takes the 1st and goal carry. He gets them down to like 2 inches from the goal line. So successful carry. He just doesn't get in. And then the next play is play action. Jake Ferguson wide open in the end zone. You go to Twitter and Twitter is just like, oh man, Pollard stuffed twice inside the red zone. Like that is not what happened. Like Tony Pollard set up a touchdown. It was good football. But I get that fantasy managers are mad about it. I just think this is a situation you're going to have to live with.
I also think it's funny that I started by saying it's all McCarthy's fault and Dak's fault. Well, Dak's throwing the ball more. You're right. And McCarthy took over play calling this year and was adamant that he was going to change the way they run the football. And to your point, he has changed. Like, I think we took that to mean he was going to try and run the football more, to which everybody said, well, Kellen Moore last year already ran the snot out of the football. No, he just meant making the run game more compact and more easy to execute in his mind, which is straight up the gut, more right up the middle sort of runs that involve less pulling, less stretching. So in some ways, it really is Dak and McCarthy's fault. Look at that. We went full circle. Like we've now gone full Stephen A. first circle. We can just stay right there and yell about McCarthy and Dak, and it's perfect. All right. So the next group here, the next player we'll give you, but we'll turn this into a little bit of a 2-for-1 on the blame game. Calvin Ridley. Now I'm sitting in Vegas. I'm sitting at the beautiful Venetian Sportsbook with one Frank Schwab, who I've done this show with and who I hang out with every Sunday night. And I tell Frank, and I'm feeling all good about this info, right? Like I had a buddy tell me that knows Calvin well. Calvin's going off week 1. And I said, yeah, I'm not surprised. My buddy told me he committed to training at a level he's never committed while he was out of football, wanted to be in the best shape of his life so he could come back and be stronger and more powerful and faster. He spent the year basically saying up yours to everybody so he could come back and be the best. And for like that first game, I was like, see, I told you all, I have insider information. And since then, my insider information is terrible. I text my buddy and I'm like, I never want to hear about fitness again because Calvin Ridley has not been the player any of us thought he was going to be.
Yeah, this one's been tough, and I feel personally responsible for a lot of people getting like really invested in Calvin Ridley because I was so excited from week 1 because that was vintage Calvin Ridley, right? He was carving up the Colts, and it wasn't just that he was getting peppered with targets. It was that he was so wide open. Like it's pretty rare in the NFL that you see a player as like the only receiver in the camera frame, but he was doing that to the Colts. He was great. Lawrence was great that first week. It was all clicking. Since that time, I mean, maybe the simple explanation here is actually, first of all, he missed like a year and a half of football, and we don't have a lot of comps for that, right? It's hard to know how somebody's going to come back from something like that. Secondly, he's been good when the matchup is right. So that Colts game, like in hindsight, very good matchup, and he thrived. The Steelers, they've been giving up a ton of fantasy points to like perimeter receivers all year. He had a great game. Like, I think the simple truth here is that he is a very matchup-based fantasy play right now, and a very sort of matchup-based asset for the Jaguars. Like when the matchup works, he can make a little bit of noise. He's also had some near misses. He's had some terrible drops. There was the Chiefs game that the Jaguars played. It feels like forever ago, but like there were like 3 or 4 balls in that game that were like college touchdowns where a receiver got 1 foot down, not 2 feet down. He was part of that problem. Like there have been some near misses that would make his season look a lot better, but they haven't happened. I think for fantasy purposes, the simple answer is you play him when the matchup is great. Unfortunately, the matchup is pretty great this weekend. I feel like nobody wants to roll Calvin Ridley out there, but it's he's got the Titans. It's not bad.
Yeah, but it also raises a question about Trevor Lawrence because what have we heard? And I've talked to some people on our shows. I've been on other shows. Everybody's saying the same thing. Like, is it time, Richard Sherman, we're going to ask later in this show, is it time to have a particular conversation about Trevor Lawrence? Because frankly, like this was when I was covering his freshman year. I remember standing on the sidelines for the national championship. And one of the college football experts was talking about Trevor Lawrence needed to hire a legal team to sue the system so he could go in the draft right then. He was that sure of a prospect that he should fight the entire legal system. And now he's a pretty good quarterback. Like that, I mean, to your point that like, hey, I'd like to make the case that he's pretty all right. Like pretty all right is not what anybody thought for Trevor Lawrence. So like Trevor Lawrence feels like a bit of a fantasy bust this year, but also feels like it's making just the regular side of football, the non-fantasy portion of football. People are starting for the first time to get a little uncomfortable with hearing how great Trevor Lawrence is.
I think we can definitively say, since we're past the halfway mark of the season and like your fantasy regular season is mostly over, he has certainly been a fantasy bust. I do think like just watching week in and week out that Trevor Lawrence is capable of some throws that, he's in a very small club that should even be attempting those throws. Like his arm is great. His best throws are some of the most impressive throws that you see each week. He is also coming off like the worst game of his season, right? The Niners just absolutely engulfed him, and they got to him with like, only bringing 4. So it didn't feel like a particularly competitive game. So like we're at an unusual low point for Lawrence. Normally throughout the year, he finishes a game and the numbers aren't there fantasy wise, but I always end up thinking, man, he looked fine. And there were a couple of near misses there. So I think he's closer than most people want to admit. I also think that an unfair thing that we do with Trevor Lawrence is we cite his like career NFL statistics all the time. And we should throw out the Urban Meyer year. Like that thing needs to get kicked to the curb and we need to never speak of it again, because that just wasn't normal coaching and that was not a normal team. And I don't put any of that on Lawrence.
I said when he was drafted that the Jags would ruin him before or fail him before he would fail the Jags. Much the way I think that we might be seeing the same thing happen in Carolina. I don't want to be harsh on Frank Reich at this point, but I don't know that we have any way to evaluate Bryce Young. So, all right, let's get one more in here on the blame game, the fabulous new game show where we decide who to blame for the failings of players on the football field and on the fantasy football field. And this one, I'm going to ask you a very specific pointed question because Christian Watson and Aaron Jones have made the blame game list. The question is, do you blame? This is very difficult. I'll give you three choices. This is a multiple choice. A, do you blame Matt LaFleur? B, do you blame Jordan Love? C, do you blame other?
Oh man. Well, with Aaron Jones, it's actually pretty simple. It's mostly his hamstring, right? Like he was great in week one. He was the centerpiece of the offense in week one. And we saw him just a couple weeks ago take a big workload and thrive again. So I think Aaron Jones, when healthy, going to be fine. Not worried about it. Christian Watson is a real problem. As to who to blame, it's an interesting question. I can, more than anyone else, I'm probably blaming Jordan Love. And this is a reflection of the way that they use Watson. So Watson's average depth of target right now is 16.7. Like he is a vertical threat for that team. He gets targeted deep downfield. And Jordan Love has been terrible at that throw. Like Jordan Love's numbers on balls that travel 20 plus yards in the air, pretty bad. He's completing like 35% of those throws, a little bit under that, I think. He's got like
that's pretty bad. Like pretty bad. You are putting lipstick on a pig when you're calling that pretty bad. That's terrible.
Well, nobody completes like 60% of their downfield throws, right? Like that doesn't happen. But 35% pretty bad. 4 interceptions on those throws. His passer rating is like 60 or something like that. So it's been like the routes that they are asking Christian Watson to run are not like Jordan Love ain't hitting them. So that's probably been his biggest problem. He's also entering every week with like a medley of injuries. He's been perpetually questionable. And I think maybe this was a case where, you know, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, Aaron Rodgers, last year, rightly recognized Christian Watson as the most physically gifted player that he had at his disposal. And he kind of dragged him to fantasy relevance. And, it's not Love's fault that he's not capable of doing the same, but he has not been capable of doing the same.
Yeah, well, I think, part of this, and I don't disagree with anything you said. I'm not sure we have enough proof of concept to know even who Matt LaFleur is as a head coach right now. He's had a Hall of Fame quarterback his whole career. So much like we're figuring out today what Belichick looks like without Brady, the difference is, Matt doesn't have a bunch of Super Bowls and an all-time great. Like, this is a weird moment for Matt LaFleur, the head coach. I don't know what I believe in, but I don't believe in Jordan Love. And you're right. The only thing I would add to your Christian Watson numbers there is that there is some, when you look at his contested catches, like he's open on these routes. It's not just that they aren't small window. These aren't tight window throws. Like Jordan Love's windows have been huge, and his completion percentage in those huge windows hasn't been good. So, there's just no nice way to say it. All right, that concludes the blame game. By the way, feel free to call us, sponsor it, give us some game show music to the back. Actually, I'll do the game show music. I'm very particular on that stuff. But feel free to call us and sponsor it, make it a full game show that we can do constantly. In the meantime, I can't have Andy Behrens with me and not do a little starter sit, right? So let's have some fun, fantasy fun. We'll pick some people, starter sit. I did a little stretching on this, so we'll go back and forth. We'll give like a starter, sit, whatever you got. I'll go first because I want affirmation. I want Andy to tell me that I picked a good one here, and I like trolling a little bit. But Jared Goff against the Bears is a start, right? Like the Bears have given up 18 or more fantasy points 7 times. They've given up 20 more fantasy points to the quarterback in 5 of those matchups. Like this feels like this is just if you've got a Lions player in this game, I'm just starting them across the board, like all of them. Doesn't matter which one. Somebody's going to go off we're not expecting.
Yeah, anytime you can start Sam Laporta's quarterback, you got to do it, right? That makes sense. And the Bears are giving up like 20 touchdown passes this year, and the Lions offense is just absolutely a Death Star right now. So I love that call.
By the way, if you do not listen to Fantasy Football Live, there are certain things you can count on. One of them is the Sam Laporta mention. Like, if there is a Sam Laporta street team, Andy Behrens will be the president of it and passing out stickers. All right, so you're the real expert here. Give me a starter sit that you've got.
Yeah, give me Brock Purdy, and this is a guy. This is a guy who needed a get right game in the worst way, coming back from the bye, and he got it against Jacksonville. 296, 3 touchdowns on the road. He had thrown 5 picks over his previous 3 games, and he had taken himself basically out of the MVP conversation that he'd put himself in. But everybody for the Niners pretty much healthy right now on that offense, and we can assume that Purdy is basically right back to being the guy who gives us multiple touchdown passes each week, as he did last year. He's about to get a home matchup with a Tampa Bay defense that ranks 31st against the pass. This is a team that CJ Stroud recently absolutely lit up. They give up the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. I see no way that Brock Purdy doesn't finish like top 8, top 10.
Are you at this point in or out on Brock overall? Just in general. Like if I was telling you Brock Purdy was going to be the Bears quarterback, your favorite team, would you be in or out on that moving forward?
Well, the Bears are putting themselves in a position to draft one of the 2 big quarterbacks, so I'd probably be out on that. But if you're the Niners and you've got Brock Purdy on Brock Purdy's contract, I'm all in because he's playing very well, and that team is so loaded everywhere else that they just need somebody who can, and the scheme is so good. Like Kyle Shanahan really only asks you to make like 2 or 3 big time throws each week. And if you can make 1 or 2 of those, man, everything else falls into place. So if I'm that team, I'm absolutely all in on Purdy.
Yeah, I'm still in on Purdy. Okay, let me give you another one here. I'm going to give you a sit this time, and we'll talk a little bit about the controversy around it. But I am sitting, I cannot believe I'm about to say this out loud. I am sitting Stephon Diggs against the Jets. I think that the implosion is in full meltdown mode. You're taking on a Jets defense that makes very good quarterbacks look average at best consistently. You're talking about a matchup that Sauce Gardner is just going to be salivating for. Ken Dorsey has been fired as the offensive coordinator, so we have no idea what that's going to mean to the language of the play calling. Now, you could argue that that means he's going to simplify and say just cram the ball into Steph Diggs, but that's what they were already doing, right? So if I'm the Jets, I trust, the one thing I know I can trust is that I have got the people defensively that I can allocate to slowing down Diggs. I know that Josh Allen has gotten in his own head with the turnovers. I know that I can impact the passer. If I impact the passer, I'm going to impact the receiver. I think Diggs versus the Jets is a terrible, terrible matchup this week.
Yeah, if you're actually a fantasy manager and you've been leaning on Stephon Diggs all year, I don't know that as a practical matter, you could really put him on the bench. I don't think you can talk yourself into it. Depends on who you've got. I agree with you in concept, though. We've already seen once what this looks like with Josh Allen and the Jets, and it wasn't great in week 1, right? It was a turnover fest in week 1. That was the beginning of the problems. So I hear you. I've got him in a couple places, and like realistically, you got to play him because I don't have anything on the bench that's any better than Stephon Diggs. But I am not expecting a big day.
This is, by the way, the reason that Andy Behrens is one of the nicest human beings in the world, because that was like, let me translate Andy Behrens. What Andy Behrens just said to me. Sorry, Stone, you're going to have to bleep this. Andy Behrens just said, "You have lost your mind." That's what Andy Behrens just said to me. There's no doubt about it. He just said, "You have lost your mind." He's like, but you know what? I'm going to be respectful of you because we are friends and you are sitting in front of a microphone and we work together every week. So I won't tell the world that you have lost your mind. But yeah, I read you, Andy. I read you. I'm more thinking like just in the game that you're right. You probably don't have anybody on the bench that you trust more than Stephon Diggs. I will give you that. But if you are sitting in a limited league, if you're sitting in a spot where, you have an other option, I think there are other options that I trust more. How's that for I'm not looking at Diggs on my roster this week saying, I got this because I got him.
No, I will say there are people out there, a stunning number of people who play in like 8-team leagues, 10-team leagues, right? And you might have options that are actually better than Stephon Diggs, because in the leagues where I've got him, like they're like 14-teamers or whatever, I just feel doomed. I feel like I got to play him, and I feel like he's going to give me like 7 points.
Can I be honest too? Like what you just said, we'll get to your next starter sit in a second, but like what you just said, I think I'm going to have 2 rules next year. that I'm capping off because I'm in too many fantasy leagues. It takes too much. Like, I'm sitting there while we're about to start a live show on Thursday every week. It's a tradition where I'm like, oh my God, I forgot to look at my own lineups. Who do I have? I'm in all these like pick'em contests and like survival pools that I've been eliminated on. Like, I've got all these things going on. Like, it's too much. All right. Next year for my fantasy football leagues, I got some rules. Number one, if we are not doing a draft in person with everybody at least making best efforts to be there, I'm not doing it. Like, if we're doing a Zoom draft, if we're doing a remote draft, if we're all just going to like sit there on our phones, I'm not going to be there because the draft is the biggest camaraderie moment of fantasy football. It's the coolest part of it. And it's where you establish an entire season of trash talking. So like, if we're not all there in the room, I'm out on doing it. And then the other thing is like, if there are more than, I don't know what the number is going to be, maybe 10, maybe 8, maybe I'll go down to 8. Like, I'd rather be in 5, 6, 7, 8 extra leagues that have smaller numbers of teams than some of these leagues where you wake up and you're like, there are 16 teams in this league and we're all sitting here needing somebody on the waiver. We're paying tons of waiver wire money for a player none of us have even damn heard of, and I cover the sport. Like, what are we doing? Like, so I got rules next year, Behrens. Unless it's a league with you, I'll violate the rules. But like, for my personal rules, I got leagues, I got rules.
I will say I love your in-person role because they're like, those are the leagues that I'm the most like connected to. Those are the leagues where I feel just sort of viscerally attached to my performance in the league, right? Those are the ones, like, without respect to how much is actually at stake in any of these leagues. If we drafted live in the same basement or at the same bar, I'm all in on that thing.
Yeah. Okay. So give us a starter sit that you've got your eye on for this weekend.
Well, you give us a sit. I'll give you a sit, and mine is, this is probably pretty easy at this point, but I am literally sitting Amari Cooper in the 4 or 5 leagues where I've got him.
I don't have other options.
He has been on a phenomenal run, like a scoreless phenomenal run, but a phenomenal run. He's got like 80 plus receiving yards in 4 of his last 5 games. But the numbers with him and Deshaun Watson together versus Amari Cooper and literally any other quarterback this year, they are pretty stark. It's basically 50% of the production. And that is not going to pay the fantasy bills. And now no Deshaun Watson for the rest of the season. We get Dorian Thompson Robinson at quarterback, which we saw earlier this year, and he completed about 50% of his throws, and he threw 3 picks and no touchdowns, and it was bad. It was a really good defense, whatever, but he's facing a really good defense this week. There's just no way that I want anything to do with this offense, at least for a week, until we see what it looks like.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. And, it's funny because I'm not out on the Browns for the rest of the season to have a good year. I'm out on the Browns for the rest of the season to have a good fantasy year. And on Fantasy Football Live, I recently I went off on Amari Cooper at one point. Like it's too hard. There's too many inconsistencies, and I feel that all the way to my core. I haven't trusted Deshaun as a quarterback. I know he had a great second half against Baltimore, but like that's all anybody wants to talk about. We're sitting here saying, "Well, look at that, it's a 14 of 14 in the second half." It's like I didn't know that football was only one half. Like if football was only one half, man, the Raiders would have had a much better last decade, right? But it doesn't work that way. The first half he sucked, right? And so the second half he's great. And so all of a sudden people are like, "Oh, woe is me. What am I gonna like? What are you gonna do?" Like Deshaun wasn't the reason they were winning football games. He had one nice half there, but like I do think, to your point, it's just, man, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time. The only thing I'm comfortable with from the Browns right now, I'm comfortable playing their defensive fantasy, obviously, and I'm comfortable playing whoever the hell they start at running back. I think Harmon could go out there and still get 50, 60 yards playing running back. Just load him up and give him the ball, let him push forward, and he'd still get some yardage out of it.
Yeah, people underrate Harmon's burst. That first step, it's a killer. He's not, doesn't necessarily have the long speed, but Matt Harmon in traffic, there's hardly anyone better.
I now know what we'll be doing Super Bowl week. I'll give you another one. Again, captain obvious here, but I really like the matchup. CJ Stroud against the Cardinals. The Cardinals gave up 20 points to Daniel Jones. Now, if they gave up 20 points to Daniel Jones, I mean, like at some point, that's just the simplest way to say it, y'all. Like, I think the Cardinals have been plucky this year. I keep saying that. I think that, this has been a good year for them to give more effort than I expected. And they've been a tougher out. They have a way of making things look ugly. I don't think they're going to be able to do that against CJ Stroud this week, especially with that defense being built the way it is. I think CJ Stroud is going to have a pretty good game here. It's pretty easy for me to look over there and be like, hey, Rookie of the Year, MVP candidate. Also, hot take, start him this weekend.
Yeah, he's absolutely been phenomenal. His receivers have been phenomenal. Tank Dell has been great. Nico Collins has been great. So I love that call. My last start here is going to be, and this is probably somebody, hopefully this is somebody that you picked up this week, is going to be Ty Chandler. He stepped into the role that had previously belonged to Cam Akers in Minnesota, right? And not that Cam Akers was doing anything particularly special, but there was at least some volume there. Now, Alexander Mattison comes away from last week in the concussion protocol. So we're looking at a situation where Ty Chandler could get, 20 touches, 25 touches against Denver. That is obviously a defense that has played better lately. They are still allowing the most fantasy points to opposing running backs. They still gave up big nights to both James Cook and Latavius Murray, right? So like you can still get somewhere on the ground against Denver. Chandler's good. He's not, he's not definitely better than Alexander Mattison. I'm not saying that, but he's got 4.3 speed. If he gets a little crease, he can take it to the house. He's a fun player, and he's stepping into a ton of workload. I think he's probably going to end up, I don't know, if he's really going to get the full workload, he's probably going to be RB 16 for me, RB 18, somewhere in that range.
I don't want to oversimplify here, but it's pretty crazy that some teams get hurt and it just throws everything apart. And by the end of this year, like last year, Minnesota wasn't a great football team, right? We can all agree on that. They were a lucky football team. This year, they've been a wildly unlucky football team in many ways. And I'm still looking at it and I'm like, I got a hard time counting them out. This is a very weird season to figure out for them and to figure out what their offense is, like how they continue to generate this type of offense.
This is an incredible coaching job by O'Connell, right? Like that win with Josh Dobbs when Josh Dobbs didn't even know anybody's name and had just introduced himself to the entire team. That's going to go down as one of the games of the year. It's going to be one of the most memorable sort of collective experiences watching football that we all had. That was incredible. So we have a coach of the year candidate here, and they got Justin Jefferson coming back too. Like they get better from where they are right now.
And I am not 100% certain if things continue in this trajectory that Josh Dobbs isn't going to have A, plenty of offers next offseason, but B, I'm not certain that the Vikings aren't going to look around and be like, hey, love to pay you to stay here. Like, don't know what Kirk's going to be like coming back from that Achilles. I could absolutely see a world where the ever lovable Josh Dobbs slides right into the starting role with the Vikings, and they find a new role for Kirk Cousins still within the organization where he's an ambassador of the brand. Everybody loves him. He's still around, and they move on at the quarterback. I know it's 2 games so far. I mean, if it was 2 games of absolute trash, we would be reacting as such. So 2 games of glory with the coaching staff, 100% I'm reacting that way with it.
Yeah, this is a version of the Geno Smith story from last year, right? And Geno's been fine this year. I don't think he's really been fool's gold, but that is exactly what we're seeing from Dobbs right now.
By the way, you mentioned in person and camaraderie and all these things. Before I get you out of here, I have to tell you, as a fantasy football guru, the single greatest fantasy football celebratory story I witnessed this. I didn't hear about it. I witnessed it. This is back before I was in this business. I was still living on a tour bus, touring all over the world in country music. I went to an all-inclusive resort in Mexico in the middle of the summer. And there's a dozen guys there. And they've got the trophy and they're going around with it. So I'm talking to the guys drunk at the bar one day. And I'm like, so tell me what we got going on here. It's our fantasy football league. This was the best part about it. They go through the whole year. And at the end of the year, whoever wins picks what all-inclusive. It wasn't a nice all-inclusive. It was a cheap all-inclusive, right? But what all-inclusive they're going to go to in Mexico. They get to pick the one that they want. Then all of the other players in the league chip in to pay the winner's fee. So the winner pays nothing to go. Then the loser of the league, the person in last place, has to literally book everything. They have to take care of every flight, every hotel, every detail. They have to do absolutely all the work. And the entire time they're there, every reservation they need, anything. They need drinks from the bar. The loser has to go get it. So the loser is punished with all of the work. The league as a whole pays for the winner. And they spent 4 days partying in an all-inclusive in Mexico together. I'm like, that's fantasy football to me. Like that in a nutshell is the best of fantasy football.
The only thing I'll say is that you got to trust that absolutely everybody in the league is competent enough to actually make those arrangements. If everybody clears that bar, and it's actually a pretty high bar, but if they all do, that is glorious. I absolutely love it.
Look at that. Throwing that out there for us. You can check Andy and I hanging out, by the way, on Fantasy Football Live every single Thursday, 7 o'clock Eastern, all the way to 8:15, getting you caught up for the entire weekend. I should note, we get you caught up before Thursday Night Football, but we also answer all your questions. #AskFF NFL is how you can get to us to ask those questions. We answer your questions for the entire weekend. Andy, you did double duty here. This was a nice little crossover episode. I feel like this was better than Family Guy and The Simpsons. I feel like we really hit something here. Like this is a little bit of juju that we needed in our life. This was juicy.
Was it juicy? Wow, that is not faint praise. Yeah, this is like one of those Scooby-Doo episodes with like the Harlem Globetrotters or whatever, right? This is one of those great crossover cartoons.
You are definitely the athletic Harlem Globetrotters, and I'm the Stone Scooby-Doo guys. Can't even say it. All right, Andy, appreciate you hanging out with us. Thank you, my friend. Jason Fitz from Yahoo Sports hanging out with Richard Sherman, NFL great, now doing great work on Amazon. But I want to start with Twitter because that's where we get so many opinions, right? And you tweeted out after Monday Night Football, the Josh Allen conversation needs to be had. Well, let's have it. What do you make of where he's playing right now?
Well, I mean, he's playing at a high level in terms of the stats and the yards, leading the league amongst the league leaders in touchdown passes. But as always, and has been the case since he's been in the league, he's leading the league in turnovers, and it's hurting his team. It's costing his team wins, and that's a problem that can't continue to happen. And we continue to say he's one of the elites because if you're going to be elite, you have to be in a position to help your team, not harm your team on a week-in, week-out basis.
So educate me as somebody that played for so long at such a high level. When somebody consistently makes the same types of mistakes, how do you fix it?
I don't know. I mean, clearly Buffalo thinks it was Ken Dorsey, and so they fired Ken Dorsey, and they elevated Joe Brady. You know, when Brian Daboll was there, things were a little different, a little smoother, and he may have something to do with it. We'll see how things are under Joe Brady now.
What do you make of Daboll? I mean, he goes to the Giants, has one great year, and this year the wheels are falling off.
Well, the wheels fall off when you have injuries at the quarterback position. Offensive line plays like absolute trash. It's hard to do anything when your team isn't doing what you're asking it to do. You know, this isn't video games. This isn't AI where, hey, I just give people great instructions and you see them go out and execute. Sometimes people don't execute the plans you give them, regardless of how well they're written.
I always think that's interesting because we love to put the success and failure of players solely on players, but I'm a big believer that coaching and systems matter, right? So, why is it so difficult to find the right blend between coaches and players for the league?
Well, I mean, either way could be true. You could have great coaches and players not executing their plan. You can have great players and coaches not putting them in a position to be successful. It's tough. That's why scouting and all these things are really important. You're finding guys that fit your scheme and fit what you do well, both offensively and defensively. And they had found that for a while with Josh Allen and bringing in Stephon Diggs. Gabe Davis has had some big games for him, but, you know, as of late, he's kind of gone missing. Dalton Kincaid, they brought in thinking he could be a huge difference maker, and he hasn't. You know, this last game didn't have the kind of game they expected him to. Patrick Surtain did a good job on him throughout the game, but yeah, I couldn't tell you why it's not working in New York. Well, I could, because Daniel Jones wasn't playing as well as he did the year before. Tyrod was playing okay, then he got hurt. Tommy DeVito is just out of his depth in the National Football League and just need more time, but the offensive line isn't giving him any time. He got sacked 5 times in the last game. Defensively, you know, it seems like they traded away Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence was having a pretty solid year. Kayvon Thibodeau was having a pretty solid year, and that's kind of going to the wayside for the New York Giants. But so I don't know.
I look at coaching and quarterbacks particularly, and Trevor Lawrence is another good example. Again, you had some comments about Trevor, but I think it's fair to say that he was considered this generational talent coming out. Year one was absolutely a disaster, and since then feels like a rebuild. So where are you on Trevor Lawrence at this point?
Yeah, I mean, he has to show it. You know, this is a production business, and potential doesn't get you anywhere. Potential doesn't get you wins, and he has the potential and had the potential coming in to be a generational talent, an Andrew Luck. You know, people were comparing it to maybe Peyton Manning and Tom and all the great quarterbacks that have come in the National Football League. But at the end of the day, this is year 3, and we haven't seen the things that you need to see. At least with Justin Herbert, he hasn't gotten the wins, but you've seen the numbers. You've seen the touchdowns. I mean, he had 4 touchdowns and 400 yards passing just this past game, and his offense scored 38 points. They didn't get the win, but you can see the generational talent. You could see him living up to the billing. Yeah, the same is true with C.J. Stroud. He's come in 9 games in and is leading the league in yards per game, is amongst the leaders in the TD to interception ratio. And so, the expectations are there. You need the production to be there.
But let's stick with CJ for a second. What is it that's been able to make him so successful so soon?
Playing well. It's as simple as that. It's a production business, and he has produced. Bobby Slowick, his offensive coordinator, has found out what he does well and put him in positions to do that. They've run the ball with Singletary really, really well throughout this season, and a good running game is something that always helps a young quarterback. And he's taking risks. This isn't a guy that's just dinking and dunking the ball down the field. He's throwing the ball down the field consistently and not turning it over. We talk about how can you change Josh Allen? Well, this kid is coming to the league and has 15 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions. Had 2 game-winning drives, the last one coming against Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, who have been playing good football. And he outplayed Joe in the fourth quarter of that game. Obviously, the drop from Tyler Boyd hurt Joe because they could have took the lead with that. But at the end of the day, again, the results are all that matters, not the could-be's, the would-be's, the what-ifs.
I mean, he's got a coach in DeMeco Ryans that recently played, right? Fairly recently played. I think about Antonio Pierce coming in with the Raiders and recently played, obviously. I think about Dion at the college level. Is there a trend right now that you can feel as a former player where guys that played the game standing on the sidelines are better able to relate to the guys that they're talking to in the locker room?
I mean, to a degree. There's definitely that aspect, especially with the Raiders. They responded so well to Antonio Pierce. I mean, even before he ever coached today, as soon as they got rid of Josh McDaniels, it was like a dark cloud was removed from over the building. You got Max Crosby going on social media and making an announcement almost immediately after it happens, and then going out there the next week and having 3 sacks in the game. They're 2-0 with Antonio Pierce. And DeMeco Ryans has a team that was supposed to be a bottom 5 roster in the National Football League, 5-4 with a chance to win that division in the AFC South. But you also have great offensive minds that never played. Mike McDaniel in Miami never played in the National Football League, but is a great offensive mind and is leading his men in a really cool and unique way. The same is true with Kyle Shanahan. Same is true with Robert Saleh. There's been great coaches, and there are great coaches who have never played. Sean McVay, Super Bowl winning coaches that haven't played. So it can be done both ways, but it is cool to see guys who played and who recently played given an opportunity.
As somebody that played at such a high level as corner, I got to ask, is there a guy in the secondary right now that's young, up and coming, that you love watching, that you think is about to blow up?
Well, Geno Stone is leading the league in interceptions out there in Baltimore. He's playing well. Kyle Hamilton, also in Baltimore, is playing well. Young corner that's playing well that everybody knows about the corners that are playing well, honestly. So it's not a lot of guys you're going to go, hey, man, I'm going to surprise you with this name. But Devin Witherspoon out there in Seattle, who went number 5 this year, is playing really, really high-level football, both in coverage, tackling, creating turnovers, forcing them, blitzing. He's all over the place, making his impact felt. Sauce, you got Darius Slay is having another really solid year. Patrick Surtain is still teach tape each and every week. Even when the defense wasn't playing as well, he was playing well. Now they're playing like a top 5 defense over the last 4 weeks. So he's a guy that's been the standard of cornerback play for the last couple of years.
Thanks for hanging out with us. I appreciate it. Good luck through the rest of the season, brother.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you.
It is time for my weekly hang with my buddy Michael Lombardi joining us right now. And I'm really interested every week to talk to you, but I want to bring a conversation we were having on Inside Coverage over to you because you will have expertise on this. There was some conversation about the Browns and organizationally who made the decision on the contracts, who made the decision to trade Josh Dobbs. And as part of our conversation with Charles Robinson, one of the things that has become clear is that it feels like Paul DePodesta, the chief operating person there, has as much say, if not more, according to some reports, as even the GM. So as somebody that's been in the front office, what do you do in a situation where you're the GM and you're going to be held accountable for moves that maybe you don't have the full say in making?
I mean, I think there's a lot of GMs that have that situation. I know I did too. You might have the title. I've said this many times. When I went to New England as assistant to the coaching staff, I had probably more say or influence than I did when I was in Cleveland with the general manager title. So it's just based on the situation. There's no doubt DePodesta runs the team there. I mean, he's been running the team for a while. He's in that analytical background. Andrew Berry was hired to be part of that as well. And so this decision really comes down to real simple. We like what we see in Dorian Robinson Thompson. We like that. And we feel like he can move forward. So we can get an asset. We can add more of these draft picks to our arsenal. And we'll get a cheaper player that can come in and help us play. And so now they had no choice but to go back to him, because you've already made that decision this summer that he was the best alternative as a second stringer. So why are you backing off of it now?
So this is just me looking at things from the outside looking in, right? I feel like the opportunity to be a GM is such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and you fight so hard. You sacrifice so much to get that job, and then you take that job, but you don't really have the power to do what you want to do. Like, then you're going to be evaluated based on someone else's moves. Like, how do you walk that decision? Like, why even take the job if you can't best represent yourself?
Because they're hard to get. I mean, look, I still get blamed for Jamarcus Russell in Oakland, and I wasn't even in the draft room, right? It's hilarious. I wasn't even there. I worked for Al Davis for 9 years. I probably didn't have any, he was making all the picks, which you understand that. And I understood it when I went to Cleveland, that I wasn't going to have final say. So you do it because you want to be in the job, but nobody's giving you that power. The NFL has splintered that power in a lot of places. I would say of the 32 teams, very few of the general managers have complete control over everything. It's very rare, because we are a league now that wants this. We want to have a lot of voices. We love the word collaboration, and we love to have people involved, and the owners have their people involved too. So, you do it because they're hard jobs to get, but you just figure out, maybe I can maneuver it. I wrote about this in Football Done Right. Jack Venisi, the general, he was the player personnel director of the Green Bay Packers all through the 50s. He picked incredible players, 12 Hall of Famers. He can't get his name up on the wall because he doesn't have the title of GM. So the Packers' history, they won't put him up on their like next to Ron Wolf and Lambeau Field. They won't put him up there because he didn't have the title. But sometimes you have the title, you don't have the authority. He made all those picks, and he still can't get credit.
What's interesting to me, just outside looking in, business owners own football teams. And in business, a lot of times it makes sense to separate responsibility and make sure that you've got checks and balances and all of these things they do in the corporate world that I can buy. From a football standpoint, though, as you mentioned, it's this collaborative effort. Is that the best way to run a franchise, though?
I think the best way to run a franchise is what San Francisco does. John Lynch has the title of GM. Kyle Shanahan has all the authority. And I think when you have that dynamic, because the GM can't run the team, the players have to believe they work for the coach. The coach has to stand in front of the players and say, look, I want you gone, you're going to go, right? It can't be, well, they like him in the front office, he's going to stay, he's on scholarship. I've lived that in Oakland. That doesn't work. But there has to be a collaboration between the two. And between the two, you have to challenge one another. You just can't be a yes man for the coach. Like John Lynch just can't say yes to everything. I think that's how they ended up with Trey Lance. Kyle wanted to pick Mac Jones. I think Adam Peters and John Lynch wanted Trey Lance. They fought back and forth, and Kyle acquiesced. And so I think even though it didn't work out, that's the right way to do it. That's the right dynamic.
So then who should be held accountable if this all turns into, because you've taught me so much about, risk in these situations. Who should be held accountable if Deshaun Watson turns out to be an absolute dumpster fire and one of the worst transactions in history?
Well, I think it's going to have to be DePodesta and Barry. I mean, because I'm told that they're the ones that decided to go ahead and do the deal. Now, I'm sure Jimmy Haslam and his family were intimately involved. Dee Haslam, all of them were intimately involved. I can't imagine you to fund that money to the league office, the owner didn't have to sign off on it. I think that's really, but they did something to get themselves back in it. Because remember, Watson said he wasn't interested in the Browns, but then he got back into it because they guaranteed the money.
Yeah, well, and that's going to be something that lingers. Like, there's no easy fix. I keep saying on all the shows this week that I'm doing for Yahoo, there's no easy fix to the contractual situation they're now in. Now, let's talk about another team that's trying to find a fix, and that would be the firing of Ken Dorsey for the Bills, obviously. Let's start there. In your mind, this late in the season, change at offensive coordinator will mean what to Buffalo moving forward?
I don't think very much. Look, I think Buffalo has a structural problem. They don't have an offensive problem. They do have an offensive problem because their whole theory of offensive football, Fitz, is to get the lead. They want to score first. And over the last 6 games, of which they're 2-4, they've given up 78 points. They've scored 33. They've played from behind in the first half in most every game. So that theory of offensive football hasn't worked. Defensively is really where the issues lie. They're a small defense. In the 3 playoff games they've lost, right, since the 13 seconds disaster, they've given up an average of 33 points. They play in Western New York. It snows. It's cold. They're small. Cincinnati went in there with backup offensive linemen and pushed them around. The Miami Dolphins in the week before did the same thing. They scored 31 points on them. So there's a structural issue here. And the structural issue occurs because you have a great player. Well, we have Josh, and the offense becomes, let's let Josh make a play. Just let Josh make a play, and he'll get the lead, and then we'll rush the passer. But they can't do that. They haven't been able to rush the passer. Their defensive front and offensive line can't dominate like you would hope it could. They've built an outdoor team. They built an indoor dome team in Western New York. That's who they are. And let me just tell you this. The Indianapolis Colts with the great Peyton Manning, and I underscore the word great because he was tremendous. They played 19 playoff games with Peyton Manning. They were a dome team that was undersized and could rush the passer and wanted to get the lead. They were 9-10 in those 19 games. 7 of those losses occurred outdoors. You got to build a team around where you play. And Buffalo's a small team that gets pushed around. And when the playoff time comes and you can't get the lead on the team you're playing and your defense has to stand in the middle of the ring and take punches, it don't hold up.
It really does speak to what we're about to see because we're about to get to that time of year where the weather turns. And I'm looking at Buffalo, who I think you're right is not built well for Buffalo. But I'm also looking at Cincinnati saying, like, are you even trying? Are you even trying to run the football at this point? Like, when you look at weather and the way it impacts it, I mean, from a fan standpoint, I can look at it. From your standpoint inside the league, what do you see that stands out to you on who's built the right way?
Well, it requires mental toughness, right? The cold's one thing, the wind's the other. And you got to be good defensively to be able to withstand the weather. And you got to go on the road and win. Playoff games, in bad weather, you got to go on the road and win. Cincinnati's defense is not the same as it was last year, right? Let's just put that out there. They turn the ball over defensively, but they can't stop the run. There's not enough. When you said it perfectly, there's not enough physicality. That's where Buffalo doesn't try to go into the game to establish anything other than the lead. You know, that it's a play here or play there. And so if you're going to play good in cold weather and bad weather, you've got to have an identity. One of the things Miami has done this year, even though they haven't been able to do it against great teams, is they've been able to run the football and they've been able to establish an identity around their backs. I think Miami's a sleeper because Miami's defense is coming. And Miami's defense is built for cold weather. And with Vic Fangio calling defensive signals the way they're playing right now with Ramsey back in that front 7, they're going to be a tough out. They'll be a tough out to get. They'll beat a good team eventually, assuming where's their weakness? The offensive line can hold up.
Which is funny to me when you describe it that way because, look, you do with real football. I play Madden, right? And the funny thing is when you're playing video game football, this is the dumbest thing you've ever heard, but go with me for a second. When you're playing video game football, what does everybody do when they play video game football? They just start throwing the ball. They throw the ball over and over and over and over again. And patience is never a virtue. And as much as it's a stupid analogy, video game to real football, I feel that way sometimes in modern NFL. Like there are times that I feel like Zach Taylor is so in love with the concept that Joe Burrow can throw the ball 60 times that he wants to do that. And they get away from themselves. What I think Mike McDaniel has done a beautiful job of this year is being more disciplined as a play caller to actually commit to, hey, we are going to find ways to run the football. We are going to find ways to at least show teams you must defend this. I think that there's a patience in this process that fans can relate to because they lose it too. But the best minds in the NFL need to be reminded at some point, Michael, to be patient and to really form a game plan around an entirety of what their offense can do.
Right, because the analytics says you got to throw the ball, but the analytics never coach the quarterback, right? You got to take some of the pressure off the quarterback, right? And so the perfect example is Washington. Okay, no one throws the ball more than Washington. Everybody, the enemy, what a great job he's doing throwing the ball. Okay, all right, I get that. They throw the ball a lot. They're 32nd in the most. They are number 1 in the most passing attempts called. They're 32nd in the least amount of runs called. They're 6th they're 10th in the league in yards per attempt rushing. They're 21st in yards per attempt passing. So they're doing something more that they don't do as well as what they could do. And they put the pressure on the quarterback. They don't slow the game down. See, that's Zach Taylor's problem too. Everything becomes easy to just say to Joe Burrow, you do it. See, Sean Payton learned this. Sean Payton, when he was down in New Orleans with Breeze, it was so easy on 3rd and 4 to call Y stick, to call spacing. Breeze would get the ball to it, but he had no toughness. And he finally said, no, we're going to stop that crap. We're going to get tougher here. And that toughness is what you need in January, in February, and when it's cold. You need that. You got to coach that. And all those analytical people that say you got to throw the ball every down, great. You've never coached a team before.
I think there's an element too, because I was in the stadium. I don't know if you remember this game, but this is Rich Gannon, peak Raiders. I was in the stadium against the Steelers for the big game where I think they threw the ball the first 20 plays of the game. And it was just this.
It was a Monday night game or Sunday night game, yes.
It was a night game. I remember that so distinctly. There's a difference to me between saying I have found a weakness in the opponent that I can expose. And I'm going to expose that weakness because you can't stop it. I'm all in for that. Michigan just did that on Saturday in college football. They ran the ball the entire second half. Why? Because they knew they could. Like, I'm all in for that sometimes. Like, I think there is a imposing my will sort of mindset. But you can't come in every week and make yourself one-dimensional. You can beat bad teams being one-dimensional. I do not believe great teams can beat great teams being one-dimensional, to your point.
Bingo. You nailed it. So that game was a classic example. The Steelers, they wanted to play base defense. They wanted to stop the run. And so what happens? You got big guys trying to cover. We threw it every snap. New England goes into Minnesota one year. They throw it 60 times. The next week, they might only throw it 20. It's all predicated on situational, whereas Zach Taylor's just throwing it. He's just going to throw it. Whereas the same thing with Eric Bieniemy. I'm just going to throw it every snap. Andy Reid will be proud of me. Well, what happens is if you look at Andy Reid's record before Mahomes, when he couldn't win close games, it was because he had no physical toughness with his team. And so that's what happens. You're so right. And the fans don't see that because every game's different, right? Every game is a different game, and you have to play every game differently. If you interviewed Rick Pitino today, he would tell you every game would be different, how he has to win the game. That's the NFL.
It's great stuff, as always. Michael hosts the Lombardi Line, which airs on VSiN, weekdays 1 p.m. Eastern, weekends 10 a.m. Eastern, as well as the GM Shuffle podcast. Check out all of Michael's NFL takes at VSiN, VSIN.com. My friend, always fun hanging out with you.
Thank you, Jason.
All right, that's it for us. We'll be back Sunday night. Well, I'm back Friday with the Sunday Night Blitz, hanging out with Frank Schwab. Always giving you our immediate, very real, very raw reactions. We're just like you guys. We're watching the games all day. Then we have a blast hanging out, reacting to every single game. No game will be lost. We're always there, so make sure you hang out with us. You can follow me on Twitter at Jason Fitz. It's easy. You can also get to me on Instagram that way. And, of course, Stone doing God's work at SJ Rochelle. That's Roshell. SJ Rochelle. That's how you follow him. He's doing God's work behind the glass. Make sure you give him a follow. And while you're at it, just go and take the time. Take 2 seconds. Give us that 5-star review. Rate, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, your enemies. Tell everybody to hang out with us. We'll be back next Thursday with more Zero Blitz. Thanks for giving us your time.